Hello everyone, welcome to the Scumdogs Kennel. I'm your host, Chris Williams, and in today's Cryptid Corner mini-episode, today I have a bunch of fairy encounters involving these children who are basically trying to sleep and ended up seeing these small, fairy-like men that reminded them, at least in one case, of a leprechaun. And we'll start off with this article. Arizona woman recalls her fairy encounter as a child. Let's read this first eyewitness's account of what happened to her when she was a little girl. A woman from Arizona wrote about her encounter with a little man who was sitting on her bed. This happened in the 1970s when she was a child. The following account was forwarded to me by my friends and colleagues at Kyle and Cam at Expanded Perspectives. And you can look at this article for yourselves on phantomsandmonsters.com. But either way, let's get into the full account now and basically see how this child dealt with seeing this little fairy man, folks? I was between the ages of 6 and 10 years old. I was in bed trying to go to sleep, lying on my left side. I looked at the crumpled blanket over my right hip. Sitting on top of it, studying me, was what I would describe as a small 8 to 10 inches tall, old gray hair and bearded man. He wasn't threatening, he was just observing me. As he started to rise and move away from me, I hid my face under my blanket. When I was brave enough to come out again, he was gone. My bedroom lights were out, but my eyes were dilated, sufficient to see some of my room with the hall light coming from underneath the door. I don't remember feeling his weight or movement. He was dressed more like a leprechaun than a fairy, an old man with white hair and beard. It was dark, so his clothes and hat looked gray. The hat was pointed, but soft and flopped over to one side. His clothes looked old-fashioned, maybe 18th century or older. No coat or jacket. Fairies are beings that share our world beyond our conscious mind's J. So, from the descriptions, folks, she said it looked like a leprechaun to her, but it was wearing a pointed hat, which brings to mind, well, the gnome. Maybe that's actually what she saw, folks. Remember, she said its clothes looked gray, but that was due to the fact that, well, it was a dark room, and she was, well, trying to go to sleep when this being made its presence known to her. So, was it a leprechaun or a gnome? We could also say that this little bearded man might have basically been observing her because perhaps he was some sort of protective spirit of the house. He might have been a brownie. You see these kinds of protective, well, spirits all over the world, folks, from Slavic mythology to, well, South America and other places where these creatures protect people or basically pieces of land, like, say, well, temples or basically other megalithic structures, folks. Perhaps this being was connected to the land on which this house was built, and maybe it was protecting, well, its charges, as it would basically see it, folks, like checking on this little girl to see if she was okay. I can't be for sure, folks, because, well, it could very well be that this was some sort of, well, other spiritual encounter. Perhaps this was some sort of guardian angel taking the form that this little girl would not find frightening, or maybe even something more malicious. Maybe this fairy was looking to basically have fun with this little girl and frighten her a bit. We don't know, folks, but I would say since she didn't really feel threatened, that this being was benign and just was checking up on her at the very least. It's a very interesting account, folks, and leaves you with a nice happy feeling after reading it, folks. Though I suppose this could all have been maybe just a dream that this little girl was having at the time, but I would like to think that maybe it was real. But our next account is very similar to this one, folks, and it's titled, Who Was the Strange 3-Foot-Tall Man Standing in the Doorway? Like in the last encounter, folks, this small 3-foot-tall being appeared to basically be observing the witness. He didn't really, well, threaten him, but this entity did seem to basically know that the witness was observing him when he was standing in his doorway. Now, like in the last encounter, folks, perhaps this being was some sort of protective spirit. Or, like in so many fairy myths, this entity was basically, well, having fun with the child observing him. Either way, let's get into the account now. Standing in the doorway was a strange little man. He was shorter than the doorknob, about 3 feet tall. He was oddly proportioned, with a large head and nose and messy hair, and he had a bulgy appearance overall. Another brief blurb from the story before we get into the real, well, whole of it, folks. The following account was forwarded to me by my friends and colleagues Kyle and Cam at Expanded Perspectives. And like the last article, folks, you can check it out for yourself up on phantomsandmonsters.com. But as I said, folks, let's hear this story now. I was a teenager. I woke up in the middle of the night and the door to my bedroom was open, although I never went to bed without closing and locking it. The light in the hall was on, which was also unusual. Standing in the doorway was a strange little man. He was shorter than the doorknob, about 3 feet tall. He was oddly proportioned with a large head and nose and messy hair, and he had a bulgy appearance overall. He did not resemble a person with dwarfism. His features were too exaggerated to be human, and I never once thought of him as being so. My room being dark and the light in the hall being on, he was entirely backlit and appeared as a silhouette. He would move from time to time. He would shift his position or scratch himself. I stared at him for several minutes, rubbing my eyes and pinching myself, thinking I may be having a vivid dream. But my impression was that I was quite awake. I was aware in that moment that this could have, perhaps even should have been, frightening, but I had no fear of him whatsoever. Like in the last account, folks, this guy was not frightened of this little being. And as I said he was a child, but he says he was a teenager at the time. He could have been around 13 years old, which I would still describe as a child. But then again, we don't know exactly when or how old this guy was when he saw this little man, folks. So I think I'm right in calling him a child at the time. Either way, the fact that this being did appear to a teenager is another interesting subject, folks, because usually teenagers or adults never see these beings. Because, like in the last account, folks, it almost seems like a child's dream, so it makes sense that a child would see a fairy or a little man like this, well, in their bedroom at night. But here we have a teenager basically seeing one, so I find that very intriguing. I mean, adults do see these fairies occasionally, but usually it's out in the woods or something. But here, it was in his bedroom. Either way, let's get back to this guy's story, folks. I was then and am still extremely curious about him. My impression was that he was simply watching me, watching him. He seemed aware that I could see him, but neither of us said anything or attempted to interact with the other. It was like seeing a wild animal up close. I didn't want to do anything to frighten him away. I had a good long look and then decided the only thing to do was to go back to sleep. I closed my eyes and fell asleep, knowing he was still there watching me, but again, I felt no fear or discomfort. I admit this could have been an unusually vivid dream, but I do believe it was my recollection is of being wide awake. I have thought of him since and am still very curious about him, particularly as the region I grew up in does not have a strong tradition of fairy sightings, at least as far as I am aware of. A lumpish little man about 3 feet tall, large head and nose, pot-belly, strangely proportioned, may have been wearing large cuffed boots. I've had several strange experiences. All were unique and rather hard for me to classify. I heard about this survey, and this experience immediately came to mind, both during the encounter and now I thought of him as being a funny little man like a dwarf, but different from any I have read about in fiction. Sometimes very strange things happen. I have to agree with R here, folks. Indeed, very strange things do indeed happen. Like for the fact that this very little man appeared to this, well, teenager. Now, for all we know, this teenager, even though I called him a child, folks, could have been basically 18 years old at the time, for all I know. Maybe 19 or 20. Either way, the fact that it appeared, well, to him is very telling, folks. Now, remember, this could be for the fact that this man says he's had other experiences that he just can't explain either. Perhaps this man has a natural ability to see paranormal things. Maybe he's a psychic, or maybe he's just sensitive, folks. Either way, the fact that this entity clearly knew that this man was watching him, and the fact that this entity didn't run away immediately is, well, maybe that's telling us that this entity trusted this man, and even though it could see him, he didn't feel at all threatened by him. All I can really say, folks, is that this is a truly interesting account. And in fact, both stories are truly interesting. They have very many similarities, but one was clearly of a little girl seeing these entities, while another could have been maybe a teenager of around, well, anywhere from 13 to maybe 20 years old seeing this entity, folks. I'm pretty much sure if this man said that he was basically nearly an adult, he would have. So I'm going to assume he was basically on the younger side here. Either way, that he did see these entities, as I said, is interesting. But folks, we are at the end of this video, so please go subscribe to my YouTube channel, Read Comics They're Bad For You. You can use the YouTube link down below in the descriptions or the chat to go subscribe to me up on YouTube. And remember, folks, I'll be back again tomorrow with another great video, so be sure to come back again then. I'm Chris Williams from the Scumdogs Kennel. Thank you all for joining me, folks. As I said before, I'll be back again tomorrow, and I hope you return. So until then, folks, bye.